lacrosse, once again, Brett Stockton of Grayling and Serge Corbin of Quebec.
We don't know every time we try, but it's so hard. Anything's gonna happen.
Coming in second, less than 2 minutes behind this event's record time holders, was the team of Bruce Barton and Solomon Carrier. They stayed close to the leaders all the way up to the end.
We made our move up the last half hour, and I think we won by 2 minutes, something like that. I don't know if we made it.
A minute 31 to be exact. Third went to Jeff Kolka and Bill Tarango, who crossed the finish line just over a minute behind Barton and Carrier. Times were a little slower this year compared to last year, where racers seemed to disagree on whether or not weather was a factor.
Not this year. I thought we had better weather than we had in a long time. Conditions at night weren't that bad. The real foggy, but not real bad. It was warm this year, and there were a lot of more water, and there was a lot more weeds in the pond, and there was a major headwind. It seemed like the last half hour, the wind was really blowing hard. That headwind, it made that harder for us to
Okay. I'd like to welcome you to episode 6 of Smitty's Endurance Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Smith. I'd like to welcome onto the show today, Brett Stockton. Brett is one of the legends of marathon canoe racing. He won the Asabo River Canoe Marathon 9 times between 1982 and 1992. In 1992, he won the Triple Crown, which totals the points for placing in the Asabo Canoe Marathon, General Clinton in New York, and the Classique in Quebec. He has won the General Clinton and Classique twice. Brett, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, glad to be here.
I think I'm, sorry about that. I had that video up still running, so I think we're all set now.
Okay.
So for starters, I was hoping you could tell us a bit about, where you grew up, where you live now, a little bit about your family, and then kind of your upbringing.
Well, I was kind of fortunate. If you're a canoe racer, I grew right up in Grayling, which is a good spot to be. And I grew up right on the river, maybe 100 yards away from the river or less than that, right across from Penrod's. You go across up on the hill there, back in that's where I lived at, a little trail that I'd drag my canoe down every day to put in, maybe 100 yards away from the river is also. It's just a great place to grow up. And back in the 60s, when I grew up there wasn't much to do other than paddle canoes and go fishing or something. So it was a good spot to grow up.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it seems, I know that's one of the challenges that some people face getting into the sport is just having access to good water to paddle. But geez, growing up right there, that must have been really nice, just being able to jump right on.
It was, and it was nice for me, particularly as a kid, because you got to remember, as a kid growing up, well, you don't have a driver's license or a car, so it's pretty nice having the river right there because I couldn't drive myself there. So it really helped me get a good start early on in canoeing. Growing up as a kid, I was paddling a lot as 10, 11, 12, 13 years of age. So I got to paddle with a lot of real good paddlers and compete against a lot of real good paddlers at a really young age, and living right there. Everybody was going and Grayling paddling right there, and I was right there where everybody's going. So I'd always find somebody to paddle with, or we would take an old canoe and fill the front full of rocks, and we paddled. That was our early C1s, is that you would just throw some rocks in the bow of the canoe and you do your training. So some of the guys today, they got a little bit nicer, they could paddle the C1s, but when we first started out, we had the rocks for a partner. So.
Okay, yeah, I know Solomon Carrier mentioned something similar, that he would just throw some sort of weight in the front, and that was his first C1.
Exactly. It's it's completely different now. I mean, I can't remember when we started paddling C1s, probably in the early 80s. Okay. I think it's when we first started. So we had that whole decade of the 70s where you'd either find a partner or find a rock that weighed just the right weight to put in the front.
Sure.
Yeah. Some of the guys had sandbags. They'd have a sandbag and they would carry that sandbag around and they'd stick it in the front. So
Okay. So Brett, did you play any other sports growing up, or was it kind of just straight into canoe paddling from a young age?
but pretty much, canoeing. I think that was being around the river right there where the race started and everybody's training, it wasn't wasn't much else to do. I mean, I played a little bit of basketball, a little bit of football. My buddies throw the ball around, this sort of thing. But pretty much, growing up as a kid, and you watched the Asabo and you watched other racers. Pretty much my idols at that time were Jerry and Jeff Kellogg. I mean, they were my heroes. When I was 12, 13 years of age, I'd be hanging out with Jerry and Jeff Kellogg when they were in town. And I always wanted to be like them. They were the big John Baker, they were the big, strong guys and in canoe racing. And I think having them to idolize, and look up to at such a young age is that I wanted to be like them. And I wanted to be this big, strong canoe racer at like 13 years old. And
Yeah.
so it gives you some motivation and something to push forward. And I think that if I would have started later on in life, I probably wouldn't have had the success that I had, just because that the excitement you have as a kid of competing and getting ready for the race and in trying to win and this sort of thing. As a kid, it's just so much more exciting and it just makes it easier, I think, starting at a young age.
Yeah. So what other races back then, like besides, so what year did you start? Was your first marathon?
Well, they wouldn't let you in at it till you were 15.
Okay.
So that was the problem I had. I was trying to get in when I was really young. I remember one year I was like 13 or something like that, and Jack Coca didn't have a partner, and I was training with him. I mean, it's hard to believe. I was 13, 14-year-old kid, and one of the best paddlers at the time wants to race with a 13-year-old kid. And so we went to sign up, and they wouldn't let me sign up because I wasn't 15. I didn't know they had a rule. You had to be 15 to sign up. So that had been the first year that I actually raced.
Okay.
The marathon, but I had raced a lot of other races, and
okay,
that's based. I think the racing circuit back then was, I think we had probably more races than they do now. There's a lot of races if you wanted to go.
What were some of those? I mean, are there any on the circuit now that existed back then?
Boy, I'd have to think about it.
Yeah.
It was just, I think, the Klondike.
Yeah.
That race, I remember that race going on in the early, as early as I can remember, the early 70s. It was in Grayling. Okay. For a lot of years, and so the Klondike's probably one of them. They moved it to Oscoda, but it originated in Grayling. But there was no spikes. They didn't do spikes. There was races, I mean, every weekend, so you could travel around. And I think Minnesota had a pretty big circuit too at that time, and there was other places you could go. Into Canada, Quebec, Ontario had some races. New York.
Yeah. When was the last time you raced, Brett?
That's a funny question. I retired from racing in '92, and I would always come back, and somebody had taught me into going and doing a race. I think it was kind of neat because I retired in '92, and I'd come back and do a race, and it worked out. It kind of neat is every decade I'd win a race. Okay. And which was kind of funny. So the last race I raced was with Ryan Halstead, it's my dog, the UP race. And come here, Dino. Was the UP race, and sure. And I raced with Ryan. I think that was about 6 years ago, and I think we won by like a second or something like that. And okay. And I hadn't really training for racing. I just kind of jumped in and did it. And I got thinking, I said, I won a race every decade for 5 decades. So a pro race.
Yeah.
So I won my first pro race when I was 15 years old in the 70s.
Okay.
And
So do you have one this decade, or are you gonna try to?
that was kind of funny because I was thinking about it. I said, if I could win a race this decade, I would win 6 decades. And I don't think anybody's did that. And then Serge messes it all up last year by going and winning a race. So he was won 6 decades. So he kind of ruined my plan. And if I come back and won a race this decade, he would go and win a decade from now. And because that's the kind of guy he is.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, he certainly has plenty of records under his name. So as do you. But so one question I have for you: how do you feel that canoe racing changed from when you started to when you finished? But then also, how do you observe it has changed even more today?
Well, it's still a great sport, but I think the problem is this is not canoe racing. It's all sports, I think, have been affected by the modern age of media, social media, high technology, all this stuff. It's really hurting sports in a sense that people get distracted with all this stuff, and they're not training like they should be training, like or less people are getting involved because they're staying at home looking at their computer. And there's still a pretty good crowds. There's still people training, still people, and it's all sports. It doesn't matter if you're watching the Super Bowl and the NFL, or you're watching a professional basketball game. And all sports, I think, have suffered from the modern age where people just stare at their computers. I remember back in the 70s and 80s, growing up on the AuSable, it was all year long, it was the talk of everybody in town or anybody in northern Michigan, or I'm sure at racers all over the United States. It was getting ready for the season. It was the only thing on their mind. And now it's everybody has a cell phone that's stuck in their face, and it's their main. It takes away from the sport, I think, or not just canoe racing in general. It's just all sports,
Yeah.
I think. But
yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, I'm probably guilty at times myself, but I observe, I've been in a school setting for a long time with my job. I'm always working in a school, and I've noticed that, with kids, some still manage to do a really good job, but absolutely, I mean, that is a big distraction for a lot of young people right now.
this is my biggest distraction is Dino. It's my distraction anymore.
He's cute. Yeah.
My training partner. He jogs with me. He goes canoeing with me, and I bought him a life preserver jacket with a little handle on it, because when he goes in the canoe, he likes to get up on the gunnels, and he always will, for whatever reason, he'll fall in. So I have to get a little handle on him with this flotation device. So I just kind of paddle by and I grab the little handle and I stick him back in the canoe.
Okay.
And he'll go out with me once in a while.
Yeah. Cool. So over the years, Brett, do you have, I'm sure I can guess your answer, but do you have a favorite race?
Well, it would be the AuSable. It's the biggest canoe race there is. And that was the neat thing about growing up on the AuSable. Here I grew up in a spot, the biggest canoe race, professional canoe race in the world, right there where I live. And I live right there. My dad takes me to the race when I'm a little boy. I watch the canoes go by. I want to do it. Everybody in town wants to be a canoer. And it was really really the thing to do. And I thought it was just a great place to live and to be able to compete like that. So it'd have to be the AuSable. And I think that the looking back on it, I think the biggest thing I could was doing it as a kid. And I think that if I wouldn't have started as being a kid, I probably wouldn't have been as successful. And I think Serge started paddling when he was a kid. Bruce Barton paddled as a kid. A lot of the real great paddlers paddle when they were kids. There's just that excitement, and you're competing, you're training, you're just focused, you're thinking year round. Because I remember when I was 13, 14 years old, and I'm looking up Jerry Kellogg and Big John, and to win a canoe race in Michigan in the 1970s was almost impossible because you had to beat Big John or Jerry and Jeff Kellogg. And these guys were beating Claude and Serge, who are at the marathon. And then Claude and Serge are maybe the greatest team of all time. So you go to a race in Michigan and here you got to beat Big John. You got to beat Jerry and Jeff. So it's a real high goal to set as a young boy. And I remember being 14, 15 years old and looking up to these guys are my idols. I just love these guys, hang around with them. But I always just wanted to whip them, And so it was a hard thing to do. And I remember we won my first canoe pro race at 15. We just kind of squeaked it by Big John. And at that moment, I knew that, that I would do really good at the sport, And I remember racing with Steve Krantz the next year when I was 16. And he was just a great guy, Steve. I don't know if you ever met him.
No, not yet.
Great paddler. And we're racing. I'm 16 years old. And Big John's in the race. Claude and Serge Corbin. And many others. Jerry Kellogg. See all these legends in the race. My Uncle Butch is in there. And I remember being 16, being just a kid and expecting to win this race, at 16. So I always tell all the kids when they start paddling, don't set your goals too low. And that's the problem I see with a lot of kids. Because a lot of parents come up to me and say, well, so-and-so, my boy's been practicing and training for a couple of years. He just wants to try to finish it, which is a good goal to finish it. But I'm like, well, why don't you try to get him to train harder and try, maybe he can be one of the top guys. They always try to set their goals too low. Because I remember going to this race 16, I'm going to beat the best canoers in the world. I'm going to try to beat Claude and Serge and Big John. And see, if I had started later in life, I don't think I'd have been as successful because you had that excitement of being a kid. You don't know any better. You don't know that you can't beat Big John. You don't know that you can't beat Claude and Serge because you're a kid. And at McMaster's Bridge, we had a 5-minute lead on them.
Oh my gosh.
And I got to paddle across Mile Pond in the middle of the night, paddling the racing to the dam against Claude and Serge Corbin and Big John Baker at 16 years old.
Yeah.
And we ended up finishing third to those guys. But, to have a 5-6 minute lead was just awesome. I mean, but I tell all the kids this, that are young paddlers, don't set your goals too low. Set them high. You're only going to be a kid once. When you get to be an adult and you get to be 25, 30 years old, you got so many other things in life that they're going to be pulling at you. You got to make a living. You got car payments, house payments. You got kids. You got all these things pulling at you. The time to do it is do it when you're young. You don't have all those things. So I think a lot of kids, they get into it and they don't realize how good they can be.
Yeah.
And that's, if I was to try to send a message just to people, that would be the message that I like to send is you're a young kid, go for it. What do you, don't sell yourself short.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't wait. Yeah. I like that.
Exactly.
So I think was that 1979? Was that year when you were 16? Is that the right year or?
Yeah, that was 1979. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a good little video on YouTube I've seen on that one. So speaking of, so that sounds like a very memorable race. But do you have any other real memorable races that really sticks out, maybe more than another, that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I would say growing up in Grayling throughout my life. At that time, Ralph Sawyer was the real king of canoeing. I mean, he won 8 Sabos. He was all-time champion. So if you were a racer, Jerry and Jeff Kellogg won 4 Sabos. Big John won 4. So your real goal was to get up there with Ralph because he was the god. Ralph Sawyer was the god of canoeing back in the day, And I ended up paddling with him, practice with him one time. The guy he's just an awesome paddler. I think he's in his 80 right now. He's probably still really fast. That's how good a paddler he was. But anyway, but my goal once I got racing was to be at one time to win the race more than anybody else. So to be all-time champ. And that's what Ralph was. He won 8 times. So the goal was to win 9. And so my biggest race was in 1992 when I actually won 9 and was all-time champion. And then at that point, I wanted to retire and raise my family and spend more time with my kids, just my boys. And so canoeing take a lot of time away from you. So that was my biggest race, goal accomplished. I remember, getting at the end and my Uncle Bob walking over and shaking my hand and said, well, you did it. You did it. You can retire now. And so that was when I basically kind of retired. Well, it's after the Classic that year, but that was my last ASABO. And that was probably my most memorable time. Put in a lot of effort, for a lot of years, finally reached the goal. And I had a lot of good partners, Serge, Butch, and that was probably my biggest moment right there is when we finished.
Yeah, awesome.
And then Serge comes along later and beats my record a few years ago and by a lot. He probably winning next year.
So, speaking of partners, and those are obviously two legends in their own right. What are some characteristics that made them, maybe Butch and Serge and anyone else you had as a partner? What are some characteristics that made them a good partner for you?
It's kind of neat because the Butch and Serge have a lot of similar qualities. And you'll find that among all really good paddlers, some people have like special traits that they're just exceptionally good at. Like Butch was running the river. I mean, he ran the river better than anybody I ever paddled with, probably better than anybody that ever paddled, because he really thought about running the river perfectly. And how he did that was he planned way above the corner. So he would go into the corner and he'd turn a corner and he would be looking way upstream in making the move, setting the boat where it needed to be. So we'd make that turn as easy as possible when we got there. A lot of people wait till they get to the corner, then they turn and their boat's not positioned where they need to have it. And the corner becomes a lot harder than it needs to. Butch was just a perfectionist as far as the boat's going to be lined perfect. So when he gets to the corner, the boat's going to be in just the right angle, just the right position to hit the corner right. So best paddler I ever paddled with for running the river. Serge, he could run the river great, but he didn't really focus on running the river great because he just focused on, he was just a machine. He was just gonna, his quality is that he just outworks everybody. There's nobody in any sport that I ever seen that outworked him. And he'd just work you into the ground and defeat his opponent just by sheer will. And that's what he does. He just wears you out if you're competing against him, and then he takes off.
Yeah. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit, and you mentioned training a little bit. Could you talk to us a little bit about what you and maybe some of the others that you knew of did for training, back then to do so well?
Yeah, I can. And it basically a lot of the same stuff the guys are doing now. We developed the stuff back then, cross-country skiing. Well, guess what? The guys in the 70s, the better canoers were cross-country skiing to get in shape in the wintertime. So that was big. Running, a lot of people ran. Paddling, well, we paddled a lot of hours. And we were doing intervals back then, so it's not a new thing. The guys are doing intervals. That was kind of what I focused on a lot. I always brought to the table, I always tried to get as fast as I could. So when I teamed up with my partner, I would be as fast and as strong as I could. And so I would do a lot of crazy stuff with weightlifting and maybe overdo it type thing. I remember lifting weights on marathon day. Wow. I made a commitment to myself that I was going to lift weights every day all year. So I'd lift weights race day. And I ended up, I think I made it 363 days where I actually lifted weights in 1 year, which is way overkill. You look at Serge, he might lift weights 10 times a year. I'm lifting it every day. So I think I overdid it, but the training's not a lot different than it used to be, really. not a lot different. I talk to the guys, a lot of the similar stuff, the stuff that we developed back in the 70s. They're, doing it again right now. Particularly the guys that are winning. You look at Andy. Well, Andy's a great paddler, great champion. But is he's doing the same stuff his dad did back in the 80s and 70s. And it worked for his dad back then. It's working for his son now. Basically training hard.
Okay. Now, would you be on the water most days?
Yes. Yeah, I paddled every day. I mean, I would even paddle in the wintertime all winter. So yeah, most days I would be on the water.
Okay. What would be about in your preparation for the marathon? What's about the longest, consecutive paddle that you would do at one time?
When I was younger, I probably paddled a little bit longer. As I got older, I paddled a little bit less. I mean, it was a big thing in Grayling back in the 70s. Hey, we're going to go to Mayo today. Well, what are you going to do tomorrow? Well, we're going to go to Mayo. Seemed to be the landmark place, And, but as I got older, maybe I'd make a couple long trips like that. It wouldn't be, I wouldn't be doing it every weekend or all the time. It'd be just a couple times.
Sure.
I think you can just get kind of burned out, physically, if you're doing 5, 6, 7 hours, you can only do that so many times.
Yeah. So, champions from every sport, I think personally stick out, because they're strong mentally, more than others. What are some mental strategies that maybe you used over the years to help you be so successful at canoe racing?
Well, canoeing's kind of a funny thing. You got to be a little hard-headed to do good. Because you have to get through those time periods when you just don't feel good. If you're facing these long distance races, you're going to hit sections where you just basically don't feel good. And it's how you get through those. Mm-hmm. A lot of times will determine how good of a paddler you are, how you're going to end up. Because if you let those, if you fall apart and you can't keep going, a lot of guys are going to pass you. So you got to be able to paddle through the time periods when you don't feel good.
Sure.
And I think that's, the better guys, they just keep pushing on. Serge was good at that. Solomon, all those guys that are real good endurance paddlers. They don't let anything bother them. They just keep on going.
Yeah, they certainly don't mind suffering a little bit, huh?
Oh yeah, I mean it's those guys, they just keep right on working, and that's really basically their secret. If you look at Serge, you look at Saul, well, they're not giant, powerful looking guys like Big John was or Jerry Kellogg, but they have a lot of heart and a lot of toughness, and they can just keep right on going. They're hard guys to compete against.
Yeah, I bet.
I got a funny story I'll share about Serge. I was racing against him, and we're racing in New York. Now I'm racing with Dick Bauer, and they caught us, and we were a couple hours into the race, and it was just we were just paddling and racing it out with Solomon and Serge, and we weren't on the right side of the river. They were kind of over to the left in the better water, and we hit kind of a shallow spot. Off they go. They just take off, and they got about 40 yards ahead. And I hollered to Serge. I said, "Hey, Serge," I said, "Wait up." He laid his paddle down, waited up for us. And they ended up beating us toward the end, but we paddled next couple of 3 hours with them. But it was just funny because I startled him. I said, "Hey, Serge," and he turned around, he laid his paddle down. I said, "Wait up for me," and it was kind of funny. It was funny story of Serge there.
Yeah, I know that is. That would seem odd to do that today in a race, especially when you pass someone like that, just to wait up. But I love that.
Yeah, it was just something, I don't know, I just came up with on a whim. We're trying to catch him, and he's like 40 yards ahead of us, and we're a couple hours into the race. And I said, "Heck, I just asked him to wait up for me." And So he weighed it up. But I don't know if you know Nick Bauer, he lives out in Washington, but he still tells that story. He couldn't believe that I did that, but it worked.
So, one as still kind of new to the sport myself, and you watch different people race, and I've watched different videos of some of you guys who did really well over the years. The technique with your paddle stroke is of course a big part of doing well. What about your technique did you feel was a strength of yours? What could you maybe share a tip or two about your own paddling technique?
Yeah. Basically, a lot of guys today they paddle. They try to paddle too fast, and by doing so, a lot of times they aren't making very efficient strokes. If you watch some of the better, I consider better guys with technique. I mean, the great guys as far as technique would be Serge. He's got his catch way out in front of him. He's pulling hard. Jeff Coca, same thing, a lot of rotation. Butch, a lot of rotation. You have to kind of rotate your body. And I think Butch described it best years ago. A lot of guys, the only time I ever heard it said this way is when you're paddling, say you're paddling on the right side, you have to throw your opposite shoulder back. And if you think about it, that's how you get your rotation. So if I throw my opposite shoulder back when I paddle on my right side, so I'm throwing my left shoulder back, then my body's twisted. So when I plant my paddle in front of me and I rotate, my body is again square. So you only see that amongst the best paddlers, because everybody else, their shoulders aren't rotating. Their shoulders are staying the same, which makes their stroke shorter. And the thing about the paddling technique is I compare it to rock climbing. I'm not a rock climber, but if I was a rock climber, if I was to reach up and grab a rock right here and pull myself up to that rock, I could only get up to that rock. But if I reach my hand a little bit further to the rock above that, I could pull myself to that rock. So when you're paddling, you're basically planting the paddle in the water. The paddle is not moving, and you're pulling yourself in the canoe to that spot. So you watch the best paddlers, they're using a real good rotation. Serge, a great rotation. Jeff Coca, great rotation. Butch. Most of the top guys you'll see will do the body rotation. So I always had real good body rotation, basically because the guys that paddled in the 70s, it seemed like we used bigger paddles back then. I grabbed a paddle right here, but this is a paddle. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Yeah.
This would be like what we used, back in the early 70s. A wooden paddle, just to kind of give you an idea, how this is what the guys are using today. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can. What about the weight difference there?
Oh, this thing weighs 10 times more. It's a lot longer and it's heavy. It's made out of wood, but this is what we started out with. And then as we got into the 80s, I made this paddle here, and you can see it. I used it in a marathon. I wrote the years that I won with this paddle. So I made it. It was 1982, 83, and 85 that I won with this paddle here. But
now is that one a little bit lighter, smaller than the original one you had?
Yes. And this would be in comparison blade wise.
Okay. So the bottom's almost close.
Yeah. So this was a paddle that I designed and made in 1982. So you can see it's fairly close, but it's still, there's probably 25% more mass. I'm just guessing, right in that area.
Do you think some of the paddles now? I mean, I'm sure I know there's a reason that they're smaller, probably primarily, so that it's lighter. But do you think maybe some of the blades are too small nowadays?
I think so. This paddle right here, this wood paddle, Butch and I, we paddled a marathon, I think 14 hours and 35 minutes. And this is a wood paddle.
Yeah, it's fast.
And we use slower canoes. And back in the day, if you had you would you would try to get a good lead to Foot Dam, because when you got to Foot Dam, there was the Kellogg started this. It was, if you're going to win the race, you had to drink some beer at Foot Dam. And it was a tradition. You know, Jerry would take like 3 or 4 of them in the canoe, if I remember right. But I remember Butch and I taking the beers, and he always liked to paddle down a ways and get out on a sandbar and drink his beer and take a swim. So it actually, I know it sounds kind of crazy, we would actually get out of the canoe, take a swim, drink a beer, and do our own private celebration. So what that led to is we had to paddle really hard on the upper end to do that.
Yeah, you need a little bit of a buffer.
Yeah, you need a buffer. I remember Butch saying, well, I want to, drink a beer and relax and go for a swim before we get into the finish line. I'm like, well, we're going to have to paddle really hard to do that. And so that was the tradition, started in the 70s by the Kellogg's. They would take some beer at Foot Dam and drink it on the way down when they had the lead. So it was just something that, I don't know if the guys still do that or not. I'd have to ask Andy Treebold. I don't know if he's.
Yeah, geez, last year it was pretty close race. I don't know that they would have had the time, but not last year, but yeah, 2019.
Yeah, exactly. You got to have a good lead, or this isn't going to work. You can't drink the beer when you're in a tight race. But that was the thing.
So I got to ask you, what was the go-to beer? What beer did you drink? What was it?
Well, Budweiser actually sponsored the race one year.
Okay.
When I raced with Surge, so I actually got an old picture where we're holding each a thing of Budweiser, a mug of Bud. They gave us a mug of Budweiser when we got done. Okay. They were the sponsor. So I just basically when you're in the canoe, you're just what anybody can hand you.
Yeah, you weren't picky. Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't picky then, so just take whatever you can get.
Right. So I know you and I kind of went back and forth a little bit, kind of preparing for this. But I know we mentioned, different boats. Could you talk to me a little bit about boats that you've had over the years, and maybe what your favorite canoe is of all time that you raced in?
Boy, I've raced a lot of different canoes, and they've all evolved over the years. So, in back, I don't know if you remember the history of the specs. The specs, basically in Michigan, you weren't allowed to race V-bottom boats till 1993. So I never got to race one in the Asabo, and so we always raced the Hassel boat and the rounded boats. Yeah. So I never got to race a V-bottom in the Asabo. And I always thought they were faster, like the Gillies and stuff that the guys are racing now, than the wider Hassel. So I never got to race any of the new boats in the Asabo. Now, when we raced in New York and we raced in the Classic, we could race a V1. So that we were racing the V1. So that I got to race that, and I liked the V1. And then I retired. So I retired in 92. And so I would come back and do a race now and then. And I think I raced some with Matt Reimer. You remember Matt?
Yeah, I've heard of Matt. Yep.
Yeah, when I raced a couple of races with him, I raced some races with Bill Taranjo, and I raced that race with Ryan Halstead. So I'd always just, whatever boat they had, I'd just jump in the bow. And I remember racing the Gillies, and we raced that in I raced it in Mile. We had the Mile race. I hadn't raced a long time. We raced a Mile race with Matt Reimer. We won that race, and we were in the Gillies. And I thought that was a fast boat. And then I raced with Ryan Halstead maybe 6 years ago in the race in the Upper Peninsula. And I think he might have, I'd have to ask Ryan, but I can't remember what boat it was, but it really went nice. It was a nice paddling canoe. So I would recommend it. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a Corbin. Yeah. I'm not sure, but they're all pretty fast. I'm one of the guys, I'm probably the strangest guy in canoeing. I would paddle an old beat up, ugly canoe for training. It didn't matter. Even today, I'll paddle, I'll go out and paddle hard in a, 60 or 80 pound touring, like the old style racing canoe or touring canoe, and to get a workout in, you know, and I can jump in a racing canoe and it feels like it's super fast afterwards, which is cool, you know.
Yeah.
But it's actually a lot harder to pull, you know, a wider, slower canoe. So when you do get in the fast stuff, it's just a huge difference. I remember Big John back in the day when he was competing. He would put lead weights in his boat and train with them. And then when he would race, he would take them out. So hopefully you'd remember to take them out. And I remember training with him one time, and he never told me this, you know, because it was, you know, it's competitive. I was always competing against him. I remember going training with him, and I picked up his boat. Like, what the hell's wrong with this boat? You know, it's heavy. You know, it's heavy because he has lead weights and and so you would take him out for the race, you know, but he would train with him in there. So he'd add an extra 5 pounds or so in the boat, and, you know, 10 pounds or whatever he had in there. And then he would take him out for the race.
Yeah. That makes sense. Certainly, I'm sure you'd feel quite a bit faster and lighter on race day. That makes perfect sense. Did you guys do any of that with paddles? Like in training, train with a heavier paddle, and then on race day, it would be a little lighter?
Well, you know, I would do that a lot. And what I would do is the springtime, I would use a big paddle to get stronger. And I always used a big paddle. I should have had this paddle here is a pretty big paddle, but I used to use one of those old Barton paddles. Remember them?
I've seen one of those. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I actually used. Was an old Barton, and I would actually race with it all year. And I remember all the other guys are using the lightweight Sabs, and I'd use this great big Barton paddle. And everybody asked, well, why are you using this big club for? And I'm like, well, it's super strong. I'm never going to have to change paddles throughout the race. I'm never going to break it. This thing's like, you know, I still have it. So I have a couple of them in the garage. I mean, I've had them forever. And so when I went from the wood to the graphite, I went to the big Barton paddle. And even though I still think Zavro makes the best paddles in the world, he makes these beautiful paddles. I got a few of them, but I used the big Barton paddle for a couple reasons. I like the bigger surface blade. I like I feel when I hit the water that I can go faster in a sprint, because I think the smaller paddles, I when I pull hard, they slip. I feel them slipping, and I think a lot of the paddles, you remember, you got to pull the canoe yourself, and whatever you got in the canoe. So a lot of times when the blades, I feel a little small, so it can hurt you, you know, if you got too small a blade, because you're kind of spinning your tires. You're not pulling yourself ahead. So that's one of the reasons I like the bigger paddle,
Yeah.
you know.
So one thing that's just really interesting to me, you know, just the technology has improved, you know, quite a bit since, you know, certainly since the 80s. You know, it sounds like in the 90s they started to, you know, get a few more of the boats and paddles that are similar even still today. But how do you think that was possible, that you guys, because you guys, the times weren't hardly any slower?
Yeah, and you look at the equipment, you know, big heavy wood paddles and stuff. We used wider boats. I just think that the guys, they didn't have anything to do in the 70s and 80s but train, you know.
Yeah.
And it really is. It's all about focus. It's about training, and it's hard to be good nowadays, just because everybody's, you know, they got cable TV, they got you know, all these things hooked to your phone, iPads, you know, your social media, all these people contacting you. You know, you're getting, you know, 50 people texting you, and it's just, you didn't have any of that back in the 70s and 80s. All you had was your canoe and your paddle. If you wanted to make a phone call, I remember being home, you couldn't even make a phone call till after 6 o'clock, because your mom wouldn't let you, because it would save you money if you called after 6 o'clock. So you go you go back to these times where it's just really basically nothing but training, and it's kind of like you look at the 70s and 80s and 60s paddlers are kind of probably like the old Soviet athletes, where they used to put you in these camps and you just train all the time. it's kind of like that time period. That's what you were living in.
Yeah.
Basically that was what you did. You paddled, and that was your highlight of the day.
Yeah. Cool. So, how about, I'd like to ask you if you've had any injuries throughout your long career. Did you ever have to deal with any injuries?
Yeah, small strains and pulled muscles, and you're always doing stuff like that as an athlete, and you paddle, work through them. Even today I work out a lot, and say I injure something, I just kind of change my training around to adjust. Say for example, my ankles bother, my knees bother me. Well, maybe I won't go jogging that day. It's like kind of work your training around how your body feels, particularly when you get older. You get, like, I'm 58 now. But it's really weird. Nowadays I still feel like I can paddle really hard and go really hard. It's just that you get a lot more aches and pains for doing it. That's that's the thing. So you just got to work through them, paddle through them.
No, I think I like seeing that there's a lot of, people, above the age of 40 and even 50 that, and geez, even 60 for that matter, that still can do well in that sport. Without the, a sport like running is pretty hard because of the impact, sometimes on your knees and hips, but it's a neat sport in that, an older person can do really well in it still. I like that.
I do too. It's like boggy. It is a good sport. You look at old Al Whiting, he just kept paddling on forever. Serge is doing great. I mean, he's just an awesome guy at his age. It's unbelievable what he's doing. And I think, like you said, for running, you can't do it. In other sports, you just can't, like, you can't go out and play football when you're 60, or,
Right.
Run down a basketball court very well when you're 60. So canoeing's a nice sport to do when you're older. Cross country skiing, I just love to do that too. I'll probably go again out tonight and ski. That's a good sport when you're older. But yeah, the canoeing, it's nice to see the old guys doing it. It's nice to see the old guys out there competing with the young guys and doing good.
So another thing I'm curious here, and just a couple more questions, but the nutritional aspect of some of these long races. What were you guys eating and drinking during the race back then? If you don't mind sharing.
Well, yeah, it's kind of I've actually, back in the day, sometimes we just drank right out of the river. You guys, some of the young guys would find it hard to believe, but yeah, I remember racing the marathon the one year, or a couple of times, and you would just be trying to get away, and I wouldn't mess around with my jug or anything. It's just in between strokes, I just scoop a handful of water and just keep right on going. Never grab my jug, never nothing. Just focus. And in between switches, I just I had to scoop my hand like this because I switched.
Wow.
And drink right out of the river. I mean, I don't know if you'd want to do that nowadays, but back in the 70s, it's kind of crazy stuff we did back then.
Wow.
I got a good story, a funny story that a lot of the paddlers would like to hear. If you got a second to hear it. But back in the 70s, we had a race in, I think it was Alpena, or was it in Ionia? We had these fair races in the fairgrounds, put them on, and they had a chalkboard, and you would in a table, and the guy was signing people up, and on the chalkboard they had this event called canoe jousting. And I wanted to mention this. I didn't want this to get lost in history. I wanted somewhere along in this story got told, because so anyway, they had this canoe jousting. I remember I was like 13, 14 years old, and we had these races during the day, and at the end of the day they were going to have this canoe jousting. And I asked the guy, I'm signed up for the canoe race, and I said, what's this canoe jousting thing? And he says, this is a new event we're going to do. He says, we've been advertising it in town all week, and we're gonna get a bunch of the locals here and do the canoe jousting. And he signed up on the chalk. I want to get somebody to do this with me, right? I'm like 13, 14. And he had these 2 8-foot 2x4s laying on the ground. And at the very end of he had a little washcloth with some duct tape wrapped around
Oh my God.
the end of the 2x4. And I'm like 13 or 14 years old. And I want to do this canoe jousting so bad. And I'm just a kid. And so I'm running around trying to find somebody to get to do it with me. So I found this one old time racer to do it with me and sign up. And we do all the races during the day, the regular canoe race, do the canoe jousting afterwards. So you pick up your 2x4 and getting in the canoe. And I look over and I look at the guys we're going against. And I'm this little scrawny 13-year-old kid. And I got my 2x4. And this guy was huge. I mean, this is a local guy, woodcutter, great big arms, big tough guy, about 35 years old, beard. And he's in an aluminum canoe with his buddies just as big as him. And he's got this 2x4. I'm like, man, I'm gonna have to get this guy, and I'm gonna have to get him early. This guy's gonna kill me. So I'm all excited. This guy is standing on the bank. He's got this like blowhorn, he's gonna like do the event type thing. Well, he didn't really give us any specifics, other than just you knock the other guy out of the canoe. So I got my 2x4 and I get in the canoe right away, and I'm in the stern, and this guy sets down. He just barely set down in his canoe, and he's got his 2x4, and I say, I'm going to attack first before he gets me. So I whirl around. I hit him in the head with this 2x4, right, with the washcloth on it. And the guy with the blowhorn at putting it on, he said, no, you can't do it. I'm about ready to let him have it again. You can't do it like that. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you do like the Knights of the Round Table. You got to get over to the right, and the other canoe goes to the left, and you guys meet, and you joust the guy out. In the meantime, I had hit this guy in the head with this 2x4, and his whole side of his face is swollen up, and this guy's wanting to kill me. I mean, and I'm this like 13-year-old cocky kid, and this guy's gonna kill me. And then the guy with the blowhorn says, you're doing it all wrong. He says, the guy in the back can't hit. He can't do the jousting. He says, you got to give your jousting stick to the guy in the front. And I'm almost in tears. I want to do the jousting, man. I'm 13 years old. I've been waiting for this event all day long. And so anyway, I reluctantly hand my 8-foot 2x4 to my partner. And in the meantime, this big guy is wanting to kill both of us. And he's got his 2x4, and we paddle out there to where they want us to go, and the other team's out there, and we coming at each other, and we're coming at each other like this. And this big guy takes the 2x4 and he swings it like a ball bat, and he hits my partner right in the face. It lifted him right out of the canoe, right out in the water. And I was almost in tears, like we lost. Well, that was kind of the crazy things we used to see back in the 70s that you wouldn't normally see. And I like to tell that story because it's going to get lost and nobody's going to remember canoe jousting. But I thought it was one of the cool things I ever seen in canoeing. Yeah, you watch these shows on TV, everybody's got all this foam padding, and you might fall in the water, and all this stuff. And these guys are, we're coming up with beating each other with 2x4s.
Wow,
that was funny.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking maybe they should bring that back for Marathon Week this year.
Wouldn't that be awesome? It would be awesome. But yeah, I had never seen it since. It was just that one weekend back in the 70s. And every once in a while, I'll remember that story and want to tell it. But it's just something that you'd only see back in that time period. People just weren't afraid of stuff like they are now. It's just kind of a neat time.
So Brett, just kind of the last question I have for you is, is there anybody, throughout the years that you haven't mentioned yet that you'd like to thank, or, just mention that helped you along the way during your canoe career, your paddling career?
Well, there's so many people, my immediate family, to a lot of sacrifice, my mom, and if you noticed when that little clip you had when Serge and I paddling by, everybody gives me a lot of trouble about the shorts we were wearing because they're really goofy looking. They got the stripes on them, the Lycra types, so that they're striped. If you go into Spikes, you see a picture of us on the wall running down the portage with them. I remember Ryan Halstead was giving me a hard time about those shorts. I'm like, my mom made those shorts for us for the race, you know? And, but they were funny striper looking things. But yeah, my mom definitely, you know, doing so much. My dad, my sister, you know, the immediate family, just in it's that way in every, you see anybody that's doing well in the sport, they usually have a lot of family backing them, you know, like Andy Treebold, you know, his mom is, oh my God, she's been doing it since for the 70s. I remember paddling with Tim Treebold in a couple of races, and it was like she had everything done for you, you know, I mean, everything's ready for you. The boat's ready for you. You know, your jug's ready. I mean, it's just, she just, so every family has somebody that's, you know, really helping and supportive. And I was blessed to have, you know, my mom, my dad, my Uncle Butch used to take me to the races. It was pretty cool. And starting at a real young age, I needed the help, you know, because you're really young, you can't drive a car, you can't go to the race without some, you know, when you're 14, 15 years old, you can't drive yourself. So you pretty much got to have somebody take you. So I was really blessed to have that family support taking me around. So that means a lot.
Awesome. Hey, Brett, thanks so much. You know, I certainly enjoyed listening to your stories, and I know people will really enjoy listening to this. So thanks again so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And if you're ever in Bay City, look me up. I'm in town here.
Will do. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye now.